ยาจตาสันติตัสสัตตาปาราชาคชาติกาเอเสตุธัมมังอนุกรรมปิมังปัชชัง
นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ So the theme this evening is something like beyond eye making, which I don't know if you're familiar with. It sounds a little bit presumptuous. Talk about the cessation of eye making, but I think it's an important theme to contemplate, and the Buddha had a lot to say about it. You can say that it's really the real heart of the Buddha's teachings. Really, this teaching about the cessation of eye making. This is another way the Buddha sometimes explained his teaching on anatta. And I think probably for maybe since the time of the Buddha, people have been confused by this, because a lot of the Buddhist teachings are, you can say, kind of basic religion, morality, and even, calm meditation, but especially the teaching on anatta is quite radical even. But and unfortunately, because it is so radical, people have trouble understanding it. And partly it has to do with translation, because it's hard to present, some of the Buddha's profound experiences in ordinary, everyday language, but that's the best we can do. And of course, we all know that just knowing the theory isn't enough, but theory can guide us to experience. So, of course, this is based upon, you say, a reasonable knowledge of the Buddhist practice, basic practice, morality, meditation, wisdom, the Eightfold Path. And the theory is not so important unless it's within the context of that practice. So sometimes maybe hearing about it can even be a little bit, disorientating. if you hear, not self, people can get freaked out even. That's part of the problem, I think, because literally, anatta literally means, as it translated to English anyway, as non-self, not self, no self even. But I think it's very misleading, because in fact, the Buddha never denied a self. The Buddha didn't affirm a self, but he didn't deny a self. And when there's a story in the scriptures that perhaps presents it quite well, when a wandering ascetic came to the Buddha, and the Buddha was open to questions. So this ascetic asked the Buddha, "Oh, is there a self?" And Buddha was silent. So he said, "Oh, well, is there not a self then?" Buddha was silent. Then I guess the ascetic got a bit frustrated and left. No answer from the great master. So then when he left, Venerable Ananda, the Buddha's attendant, asked him, why were you silent? Why didn't you speak? He said, well, if I if he asked me, is there a self, and I said there was a self, that'd go contrary to my teaching of anatta, wouldn't it? And if I said there was no self, the person here would be so confused they'd go away saying, I had a self until I came to talk to the Buddha, now I have no self. But the main point behind it is the Buddha had a very different understanding of self than the average person. Generally, the average person assumes there is a permanent, fixed, stable self, right? It keeps paying taxes, it keeps getting bills, it comes to the same person. You wake up in the morning and you say, yeah, I guess it's me again. But just hearing that, that the Buddha's realization was that this self we take to be a self is actually a constantly changing process. Not a fixed, stable thing. It's constantly changing. And once if you hear that, maybe you don't realize it till you hear it. But when you hear about it, I don't think it takes a great genius to realize, fortunately, myself today isn't the same self that I was 10 years ago. Hopefully I've changed. For the better, of course. And I think I can notice that change, actually. Of course, the body's noticing it too, ouch. But what we take to be ourselves is constantly changing. And even that is already maybe a bit much for some people to swallow. What? I'm changing? Who am I then? Don't go there. Don't go there. Just recognize that there is a possibility that you aren't the self you think you are. And then, this is what the Buddha realized, that there is a constantly changing process that we take to be a self. And then the Buddha, through his own, very deep meditative insight, when he woke to that, he also woke to the processes involved. It's not just a theory he had; he actually saw the processes. And basically, it's the root of the processes is ignorance and craving. Those are the cause of our wrong view of understanding the nature of self. So the Buddha then, when he understood that, he also found a way to be free of it. It doesn't mean that you just, dissociate and say, oh, it's not me, it's not me, it's not me. It's not so simple, unfortunately. But you have to understand the processes involved. So the Buddha gave a whole series of techniques and methods to practice. Very simply, it's called calm and insight meditation. But of course, it's based upon it has a basis of morality and you can say the Eightfold Path, morality, and there's some certain degree of understanding involved. You need to understand that if you don't believe that this self is changing, well, of course, you keep seeing the same thing. You look for constancy then. You look for stability. And actually, that's the nature of self. Because self is constantly changing, it doesn't want to be found out, because it's a phony. It's a false reality, this self we believe in as being constant. It's false. That's why we keep suffering, because we're being fooled all the time by it. And so it sets up these particular safety mechanisms, self-preserving patterns of identifying itself and maintaining itself. But through the development of meditation, the mind is more calm, for example. I mean, when some people's sense of self gets threatened, usually it throws up all kinds of thoughts, right? Yeah, it starts to get very, very distracted, very confused, and there's all these different hindrances. Some people, when they are under stress, they just fall asleep. They They lose their energy and fall asleep and blank out. Kind of selective amnesia. Others, they get very confused. If I'm not myself, who am I? Well, maybe I'm this, maybe I'm that, maybe. But when we develop some degree of calm meditation, the mind calms down, you can begin to see more clearly what's really going on there. You see some of these tricks and games the self plays, all these hindrances it throws up. And when you can work your way through the hindrances, that'll be, well, that might be, 30, 40 years of practice, but can't say when. The Dhamma is timeless, right? but if you have some faith and some energy, at least you can suppress some of the hindrances. Like people come to, say, a meditation retreat, and they're very inspired, and they're very diligent, and the artificial environment set up to reduce the distractions. And you have been many hours trying to watch the breath, and can't say when, but I think for most people, after a few days of watching your breath, finally you might notice it. Oh, breathing. And the thoughts have faded to the background, at least. Then, as soon as you start thinking that, of course, the thoughts pop back in. Oh, stop thinking. No, I'm thinking about it. You're thinking about not thinking again. Back to the breath, back to the breath, back to the breath. If your mind can settle on the breathing, then you aren't thinking. Your mind isn't watching the thinking anyway and being distracted by it. But then the Buddha gave, we call insight meditation. I mean, there are some basic exercises, and then there is the theory of it. So I mentioned the theory first, maybe. Yeah, there is the Buddha gave. He gave many, many different techniques, different ways to deal with our delusion of a permanent self. But there's three basic ones. The first one is probably the most mentioned most often, is within the guidelines of what we call the Four Noble Truths. That is to know what you're observing, know particularly suffering. Suffering, dukkha, is a sign yourself is failing. Because the real purpose of self is to always make you happy, right? Huh? Isn't that the purpose of self? Yeah. If your self is allowing you to suffer, I mean, some people, they're happy to suffer, right? They're called masochists, but I think the average person, likes to be happy. See, that's the when self is successful, then you're happy and comfortable, and whatever however you define it, however you define happiness. But if you're not happy, if you're suffering, yourself is letting you down, isn't it? It goes to the point where if you're suffering too much, then you probably kill yourself. Yourself just can't stand it anymore. Self, you're letting me down. Self, you're a failure. I think I'll try again next lifetime for a better self. But be careful. You never know what self you get next time. Might be born as an animal self, and then you're really really in trouble. But for example, if you observe the nature of suffering, then you find out the limitations of yourself. Begin to observe just how yourself is not being successful all the time, and not keeping you happy all the time. And then the Buddha says that this suffering should be understood completely and fully. That's when yourself lets down its guard, or it's been exposed, or whatever. And then the second part of it, the Four Noble Truths, suffering, the cause, what's causing it now? If you have expectations, myself should be like this, and then you notice it's letting you down. Because you're holding on to that identity. You're holding on to that expectation of how yourself should act or be, and it can't keep it up. It's a charade. It's false. So every once in a while, it lets down its guard, or it gets showing up. and your expectations cause you suffering then. So then you realize, okay, shouldn't have expectations. Having expectations means the disappointment. Okay, let go of that one. And you can begin to maybe see through some of these particular games the self is throwing up. And you can become more, okay, get through that one, more peaceful with not having expectations. I don't need them. I can be more open-minded. I can be more receptive. Okay? So you see the cause of the suffering, then you see when cessation arises sometimes. When you can resolve that, and not play into that game, then the suffering ceases. Aha, that's the way. And of course, it's supported by the path of practice, the Eightfold Path then. In the Buddha's explanation of suffering, he also explained exactly the same thing as the cause of identity. Identifying as a self is a cause of suffering. Identity, having an identity, holding on to an identity, and suffering is exactly the same thing. Yeah? So very simply, don't hold on to your identity. Your passport will do it for you. More recently, I had to renew my visa, you see. So the only problem was I only have 2 pieces of identity to say who I really am, you see. But of course, being a monk, I can look in the mirror and say, yes, that's me. Well, actually, I could say that's not really me because because I know I'm anatta, but it's hard to tell the visa people that, they don't play that game, So. But it was hard for me to find pieces of identity saying who I was, in the relative sense. So, but the average layperson is reminded often, bills coming in your name, tax requests, whatever, bank statements, mortgage payments, whatever. I had none of them. I had nothing. Nothing comes to my address. No no tax payments and no tax refunds either. so, so I'm off the radar, I guess. For the government, basically. But once we understand these certain, the Buddha's giving us this type of inquiry. Look at what you take to be yourself. I don't want to get too technical, but some of you heard it already, some of these Buddhist teachings. The Buddha was observing the nature of the self, and he realized that there's these 5 basic functions of a human being. They're called the 5 groups of grasping, the 5 khandhas. There's body, there's feeling, there's perception, there's mental activity and consciousness. Those are the functions of life, basic functions. And it's by our identifying with them as a self that the problems come. With perception, it's based on memory, for example, memory. How many times, or feeling, how many times have you identified with your feeling and made it into a great big story? I feel so miserable, and I'm just a miserable person, and maybe it's my bad karma, and maybe all it is a feeling, an impermanent feeling. And when you feel, you notice that feeling, can you really open to it? Can you really open your mind to it and really observe it fully? It's just a feeling. As unpleasant as it is, can you just open to it? Rather than make a story around it and try and ignore it, try and push it away, try and distract yourself from it, and you just look at it. Oh, that's what dukkha feels like. And you may notice that if you can do that with a clear mind, when you can observe dukkha from a calm place, it's different. Calm dukkha is different than distracted dukkha. And calm dukkha can be very peaceful. Yeah, it can be, I wouldn't say pleasant, but, but it can be very peaceful. You know? Normally, I mean, speaking personally, normally if I have any dukkha, I'm trying to get away from it. Yeah. Normally, even after 40 years of meditation, but sometimes there's still some what do you say, some latent tendencies there, you say, of self. And if I don't catch myself with these old habits, that's just it's like an old habit I've learned, you know. Dukkha comes along, and how can I get away from it, you know? But sometimes I can recognize, oh, it's just a feeling. Why make a big deal of it, you know? And if you can observe it patiently and calmly, it changes. You know? Even just being able to calmly observe it already has changed into equanimity or neutral feeling, a bit more neutral anyway. I mean, I have my limits, you know. But the same with pleasant feeling too, you know. Sometimes you notice pleasant feeling arising, and then, oh, that's wonderful. Oh, I really want to keep this, want to hold on to it, and then it fades away, and then suddenly it's suffering again, huh? Suffering of disappointment because your pleasant feeling passed away. But you recognize, oh, it's just a pleasant feeling. Comes and it goes, comes and it goes. And actually, you know, if you're observing nature of feelings, you know, when the pleasant feeling comes, it's really very wonderful, because it is, isn't there? If it was there all the time, you'd probably be bored stiff after a while, you see. You know, if the pleasant feeling was there all the time, I want a more pleasant feeling. This is getting boring. But then it shifts to an unpleasant feeling, and then when the pleasant feeling comes back again, oh, thank you. It's a surprise. It's a welcome surprise. But that's just the nature of feeling. You know, it's we have in fact we have very little control over them. You can control maybe the conditions for them, but you can't control the feeling. You know, you recognize, okay, we can't control the feeling. Many times we can't control our states of mind or consciousness or the body, but how you relate to it, you have some degree of control over. And you begin to observe them more carefully. You know, like one of the basic exercises in the Eightfold Path is the practice of mindfulness. So if you can mindfully observe, oh yeah, the nature of body sensations, you know, and feeling tones, you know, states of mind, and the Dhammas, the four foundations of mindfulness. You know, you can be more aware of them. Ideally, you don't build more stories about them. You won't add on to it more. Just observe. That's what it is. End of story. That's what a feeling feels like. You can see how it arises, how it passes away. That's what we can develop these practices of mindfulness. Concentration helps to settle the mind, focus the mind. And another one of the techniques the Buddha pointed out, the most, you can say I would say it's kind of the fast track method. Everybody hears. Everybody wants the fast track, right? In theory, it's the fast track, but depends upon the level of your practice whether it actually works or not. But one of the simplest ways to awakening, the Buddha said, was to observe these five groups of grasping. You observe them, and you observe the arising of them and the passing of them. The rising and the passing. The arising of the body, the passing away of the body, or sensations, we can say. The rising of feeling and the passing away of feeling. It was contemplating the impermanence of these five groups of grasping. How they were impermanent. As I say, you know, when the self is very strong, it's looking for permanence, looking for stability. So the way around it, the way to kind of trick it, is to look for the impermanence. Yourself is programmed to look at permanence, and then your faculty of wisdom looking at the impermanence now, looking behind it, as it were. Kind of tricking it into seeing the shadow of it. But first of all, maybe we just hear about it, and maybe contemplating impermanence can be a little bit artificial, but you're looking for the arising and the passing. Just for example, you observe the breathing, and most people, they observe the breathing as an object, right? The breath. Here, I'm breathing. But you can turn it around to observe the arising and the passing of the air coming in and out of the body. See? When you say breath, you immediately associate, oh, this is mine. This is my breath. Huh? But is this your breath? It's just air passing in and out. And who does that air belong to? Huh? It doesn't even belong to the Australian government. not to mention me, but it doesn't belong to the air goes around the world, maybe the air we're breathing came from India, actually. No, it came from across the Indian Ocean, from Africa. We're breathing air from Kenya. If it blew in from the west, I guess. But you can observe then just changing your perception of the focusing on breathing rather than focusing on the breath as an object to focus on. Observe the arising and the passing, And you get a different perception of it, don't you? This air is coming in and going out. I can't own it. Yeah? The sense of a self who is breathing, who's owning this air and controlling it, sort of fades away. Yeah? It's just air passing in and out, in and out. You're just a passing breath. Is that shocking? Okay, I'm a passing breath that pays taxes and votes and stuff, but that's a long story. Just forget about that part. You're just a passing breath. Yeah, for a moment, it comes in and goes out, and goes in and goes out. Yeah. And extending that to something like the feelings. And if you can, how about your states of mind, your thoughts, for example. Yeah, you can observe your thoughts. What is thinking anyway? This is it's a passing of mental activity, isn't it? That's what thinking is. I will go there, and I will do this, and I will do this, and I'll do that. And what's the thought actually? Where is the thought? Besides the movement of your mind, where is the thought? Huh? Anybody? I lost my thought here. It just came in and went out again. There's a thread somewhere there. But observing the impermanence, that was how the Buddha, first of all, it was the first of the three characteristics of reality was impermanence. The second one was dukkha, or you can say unsatisfactoriness or imperfection. You recognize that the human condition is basically unsatisfactory. It's a bit hard to, for us comfort-loving people to recognize that. But again, once you begin to observe, it's a possibility to observe this actual reality. You sit here for a little while, and then you sit down comfortably for the beginning, and then after a while, even the soft cushion gets hard. Huh? Yeah. You come in from walking up the hill, and you're nice and warm, and you sit here for a little while, and it starts to get colder. And then you get more tired. Huh? Normally the self doesn't look at those things. Whenever there is some discomfort, you move, you adapt, you change, you try and get away from it. Huh? You change your posture, you put a blanket on if you're getting cold, tired, you start to drift off. Not yet. You start thinking about you have images of your pillow, maybe. But I mean, it's a matter of contemplating these particular themes. See, some people, they take up Buddhist meditation and they just watch the breath, and it can be very peaceful, very peaceful. It's calm meditation, but the Buddha is pointing out insight meditation. Insight is to see things as they really are, see things clearly. So it is in a way pushing back against the normal tendency of the self. The self wants to see permanence, happiness, and self. But the Buddha, with his teaching of the three characteristics, we're trying to investigate impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and not a stable self. That's going to be a little bit, doing the contemplating anatta, for example, can be a little bit tricky because, self-observing, not self. You can fool yourself very easily. But one of the characteristics of anatta is lack of control. And as meditators, I'm sure we all have some experience of lack of control over your mind, at least. You sit here, come in here and say, oh yes, I'll just sit here and watch the breath. Off again, back to the breath again. Just sit here and watch the breath. Okay, self, behave yourself. I'm telling you to watch your breath. Off again. Which self is trying to tell which self to do what? You have your Buddhist self saying, watch the breath, and your other self saying, yeah, I want to watch a movie. I've got to solve this problem at work. But I think a safer option is to look at impermanence. I mean, this is probably why the Buddha often, because it was a little bit more obvious. If you hear about it and you try to observe impermanence, yes, things are changing. Yes, all I have to do is look at my skin. Oh yes, I guess I'm not 21 anymore. No, I'm at least 22. And sometimes, if you set up that observation of impermanence, first of all, maybe it's a little bit artificial, trying to observe the breathing arising and passing away. But when you set up that type of inquiry, sometimes it begins to function by itself. When you're observing, for example, how the body changes, like in the walking meditation, you can observe the body moving, the movement of the body, see? And then maybe you notice sometime when you're just walking, I'm aware of the different muscles moving and the different ways the body is being presented. Different steps I'm taking and things becomes much more normalized from setting it off in a formal way. Whereas the body, if you don't set that inquiry up, you just immediately say, oh, my body is walking. My body is standing, my body is sitting. Yeah. But if you observe the bodily sensations and the postures directly, what body is sitting there? It's sitting different than before, walking different than before. And now there's sun on the body. Now it's warm. Now it's cold. Now it's now it's feeling light. Now it's feeling heavy. And once you bring that up and you try to encourage that observation, that reflection, it becomes more normalized. And then after a while, your body is the body is just flowing. The body is moving without the reference to, oh, I'm moving the body, or my body's moving. There just is movement. Constant change. Sometimes it comes to the point where you can't even recognize. Now sometimes I get up in the morning and think, whose body is this? I'm like, ouch. A different body every morning. And then I'm happy that I don't identify with that body. Achy body, that's not me, that's not me. No. And one of the other techniques the Buddha gave, which is not very much mentioned, Buddha also suggested to look at the gratification and disadvantage and escape from the 5 groups of grasping and the 6 senses. The 2 things which the Buddha recognized that people identify with are these 5 groups of grasping, and or the 6 senses. Maybe the 6 senses for some people has more meaning. Eye, ear, nose, body, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Because we engage with them very, very regularly. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking. And of course, the natural tendency is when there's a seeing of something, the assumption is, oh, I am seeing. Rather than I, not I, but physical I. Maybe I should use ear maybe or something. It's less confusing. You think, I hear, But no, it's the ear is hearing. There's ear is hearing, and it sends the information to the brain, picks up the sound waves, sends the information to the brain, and the brain processes it and said, oh, hearing frog, hearing bird, hearing whatever. But if you don't recognize these processes going on, you immediately assume, oh, I'm hearing bird, and I like bird, and bird is tweeting for me, And I'm a bird lover, and a bird's tweeting to me, and I'm somebody very special, and then you're going a little bit crazy. People hear voices in their head and say, oh, God's speaking to me. I'm a very special person, Somebody else will say, I think you're hallucinating, but it's just voices, it's just sounds. It's just maybe sometime it is just a memory coming up. I remember when I was in early days in Thailand, and I was doing walking meditation, and I was up on near the stupa doing walking meditation, and suddenly I smelt lemon blossoms, and I was so vivid, I stopped. Where's the lemons? There weren't any. And then I got a bit of a shock because I realized it was a memory. And I don't know if you know, but the sense of smell is one of the strongest senses. The sense of smell goes right to your limbic brain, to your reptilian brain automatically. Isn't filtered through the cerebral cortex, you see. Hearing and sound, you usually have to interpret, but smell goes right to your. So it was very, very deep impressions. And then I realized, one time I was traveling in Cyprus, and I happened to be there in the springtime, and everywhere there was a smell of lemon groves because they have lots of lemons in Cyprus, you see. That's why they call it Cyprus, I guess. Not citrus. No. They had lots of lemon groves there, and so it just everywhere you went, there was just a smell of lemon blossoms in the air. You see, so it was the first time I think I ever smelled lemon blossoms, because living in Canada there weren't too many lemons. They're growing in the snow. But it was such a strong impression, and then here I was in Thailand a couple of years later, and suddenly this memory came back. these memories, they're just like your mind taking a picture of something, and filing it away. And sometimes they pop up again, they come out again. Yeah. But you understand the nature. That's what the nature of sanya. Sanya means, translated as perception, but it's based on memory. We perceive things based upon what we've already remembered. We have associations of things, you see. So when I was traveling in places in Thailand, for example, I hadn't never experienced Thailand before in the beginning, So many strange things. I had, of course, my associations were about, trying to put it to something in Canada, which was not very helpful. Just very many strange things. So I just had to, okay, that's a strange thing. That's a Thai thing. That's okay. But now I have many associations of Thailand now, and now I look at, I'm in Australia and I think of Thailand. Looks like, no, Australia is very different too, you see. So you have to develop new perceptions, new memories. But when we begin to investigate the nature of these 5 groups of grasping or the 6 senses, begin to recognize, you can see this movement of the mind then, from hearing or seeing something to, your own identification with it. Oh, I am seeing that. Why is there an I there, actually? Why is there an ego there? Why is there a self there? What's actually going on there is just a chemical reaction, just a mental process going on there. You don't need to add the I to it. And you can notice sometime when you do add yourself into it, it gets really distorted. Like you hear a memory, for example, just hearing. There's a sound right now, and then before you know it, like in our experience of the smell, for example, there I was back in Cyprus 2 years before, I wasn't in the present moment anymore. I wasn't in Thailand right now, here and now, I was transported back to Cyprus. And, it was a bit disorientating, but I got a free ride anyway, but temporarily, and then I realized, oh, where's the breathing again? Lost connection with the breathing, must be watching the breathing, or cessation of my feet touching the ground and walking meditation, and I'm in Cyprus. Boy, it's a long way away from here. And then I could have stayed there. Sometimes I did. When I was meditating first in Sri Lanka too, I've been traveling quite a while, and then I sat there in my little room, and sometimes I get a memory of some place comes up, and then I knew, oh, this is going to be a Greece day today. Oh no, this is going to be a Turkey day today. This will be an Italian day today. Oh no, one memory sets the other one off, and I have a whole stream of thoughts about being in Italy and back to the breathing, Sri Lanka, 71. Come back. Because of course it was just all memories, so, and very limited too, and I couldn't change them. So what's the point? Whereas when you're in the present moment, you have a possibility to change things. You have the power to make new kamma then in the present moment. You see, you can indulge in those thoughts. So you can follow those thoughts. You can make them worse or better. Yeah. But in memories, that's how it was before, and you just like taking a holiday, yeah, kind of a cheap holiday, I guess. Well, in the days now of coronavirus, you can't travel anyway, so that's better than nothing. I guess. But I was in Italy in the winter time, so it wasn't that great. I was there a few times in the summer too, but long as you have good memories, it's not too bad. Huh? But when we reflect upon the nature of, the way things really are, then we can see the nature of mind and body in the present moment. You realize that it's actually more peaceful to leave yourself out of it. There's just sound, just hearing. Even if they're hearing a bird, then already, what kind of bird? It's not, hoping it's not that firebird again. Hopefully it's not one of these squawky Australian birds, hopefully it's a nice, sweet bird. But just hearing, just sound, just hearing, and then it's gone. End of story. And there's a real clarity to it. There's a real simplicity to it. And it is absolutely real. Just a sound arising and passing away. You bring yourself into it, and big distorted story starts up, you see. And of course, maybe you can make it into a Hollywood movie if you want, but but it's not very peaceful, is it? Your mind gets disturbed, your body gets disturbed, but just hearing arises, passes away. Seeing arises, passes away. I mean, you can see that that's much more peaceful. Then you can recognize, oh, that's what the Buddha meant by anatta. That this self is an artificial construction. And the more you identify with that self and you play with it and you keep feeding it, the stronger it gets and the more confusing your life gets. That's what the Buddha called ignorance. Ignorance is the fundamental, source of dukkha. When you just see, oh, there's only bodily sensation, there's feelings, there's perception, mental activity, consciousness, there's hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, simple story. And it's very, very peaceful. That's what's really happening. No distortions, no confusions, that's just what's happening. So when the Buddha talked about the 5 groups of grasping, he said the most direct way is just to observe the arising of the bodily sensations and the passing away, the arising of feeling and passing away, the arising of perception and passing away. You can keep observing those 5 groups of grasping, and the rising and passing, then you're right in the present moment with them, because that's what they're doing. There's a feeling arising, there's a memory arising, there's a thought arising, passing away. Or with the 5 groups, or the 6 senses. It just is a sight, a sound, a smell, a taste, a touch. It comes and it goes, and it comes and it goes. And your mind is right there present with it. When the Buddha gave with the 6 senses, there's also another discourse where this elderly monk comes to the Buddha and asks him, can you give me a real succinct Dhamma teaching? And the Buddha says, first of all, he says something like, here you are, whatever it is, very elderly already, and you haven't listened to my teaching yet. And you come to me in old age and ask me for a quick one. So but the Buddha must recognize he was soon going to die, so better give him a quick one, quick answer, a quick practice. So he said to this other monk, he just said, one of the easiest ways to practice, direct way, is just to see when there is a sound, when there is a sight, there's a sight. When you see, just see. When you hear, just hear. When you perceive, just perceive. When you think, just think. When you can just do that, then there's no space in there for the I to come into it, basically. There's no here, there's no there, there's no up and there's no down, no proliferation, no stories. There just is seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, tasting, thinking. End of story. Well, fortunately, this monk had practiced long enough to get the message. So he tried that, and it was successful. Very, very simple teaching, but, are we able to do it? Yeah. How many times can you just see, end of story? You just hear, no more proliferation. Yeah. How often can you do that, huh? But if we keep developing the practice, developing more concentration, more supported by the Buddha mentioned the Eightfold Path is supportive of the practice, the development of the four foundations of mindfulness, the factors of awakening. Many of these spiritual powers are supports for practice. Where we can cultivate them, and then when we recognize the theory of the practice, then it's able to do it. When the mind has more calmness of mind, more concentration, then you can recognize, you can observe now the thoughts rather than being pulled into them. Because your mind is calm now, calmed of all the distractions and disturbances of the mind. So the mind can observe what's going on. You can observe thinking without being pulled into the thinking, without thinking about the thinking. You can just observe it. Thought arises and passes away. You don't grab onto it, you don't push it away, you just observe it. It arises, passes away. So the theory is very easy, in theory. But the real heart of the Buddhist teaching is to put it into practice. And we understand the theory, and maybe we can try and develop some of these exercises in the course of our meditation practice. And once we get some grounding in it, to try to apply it in ordinary life. Sometimes just being able to, you go about your ordinary life and just stop. Observe the breathing, breath, the breathing process, arising, passing away, arising, passing away. Hearing, sound, just sound, just hearing, no proliferation about it, just hearing, seeing. Sometimes it helps when you have there's a sight which is very, very impressive, for example. It could really stop your mind. When I was in Switzerland, the monastery is in the middle of the Swiss Alps. And a lot of people come to the Swiss Alps to go walking in the mountains for these, to look at the beautiful scenery. And they probably don't realize it, but many of them probably have, from the scenery, they get very good concentration. If you haven't got good concentration, you might fall off the mountain otherwise. But for sometimes you just stop and you look at the view and your mind just stops too. It's so shocking or so awe-inspiring sometimes. There's a few lookout points, and you come up to them and you're walking up the mountain for half an hour or something rather, and you get to this viewpoint and you step out there and look at it, and just for a moment you got instantaneous concentration. Usually just for a moment, then you say, get out the camera and take a picture. But sometimes you can prolong that, Yeah. And then if you develop concentration, you don't even need to climb a mountain to get concentration. You can collect your mind in the present moment, anytime, anywhere. You develop concentration. So, the Buddha gave us not only the theory behind it, but he gave us the practices to follow too. So it really requires energy and time to put into it. And, the benefit is that basically the more we practice, the more we see the results for ourselves. It's not a directly time-bound situation, but generally speaking, because there's a number of factors need to come together, see. You can have a lot of energy, a lot of energy for practice, but maybe your mind is restless. Too much energy, maybe. Yeah. And then you relax and then you fall asleep. Got to be able to find the right balance. That's why the Buddha mentioned in the Eightfold Path the right energy, right mindfulness, right concentration. Some people, maybe they overdo in the concentration part. Too much concentration, and there's nothing to observe. The mind is so peaceful. nothing to observe, no thoughts, no feelings, nothing, just peace. It's too much concentration. If there isn't enough concentration, then maybe the mind isn't quiet enough. Too much thinking. You observe a feeling tone in the body, and then you start thinking about it. Oh, is this a pleasant feeling or an unpleasant feeling? I mean, it's a neutral feeling. Oh, I don't know if that's a... Now, back to the breathing again, settle the mind, and observe clearly. Then you'll know. Yeah, you don't need to think about it. You won't find out if the feeling is pleasant or unpleasant by thinking about it, because the feeling is a feeling, it's not a thought. Huh? So you have to observe it as a feeling. So by developing these exercises, perhaps we can begin to notice, a decreasing emphasis of I making. Just for example, observing just sound rather than I'm hearing sound. You can just observe the sound, just hearing. Then you can leave the self out of it. So I making becomes unimportant. It recedes to the background. It's not our first default. For most people, it's their first assumption. Oh yeah, I'm hearing sound. Yeah. Which I though? There's only hearing. That's all there is in reality. Just hearing. There's nobody there to hear it. There's just an ear and a brain. That's all it hears. And you say, oh yeah, but I mean, it'll get lonely, so I've got to be there. I've got to be there to hear, because you don't have to be there. And you find that when you're not there, it's much more peaceful. You're just hearing, it arises, passes away, and end of story. So the more that we practice this, we begin to recognize what Buddha was talking about, the ending of I making. Yeah. And once we recognize that, we also recognize the benefits of that. The Buddha was pointing us towards reality-centeredness, I say, towards the Dhamma. Most of us, our life is self-centered. Keep thinking about ourselves all the time, when the self is phony, it's artificial. You're wasting your time thinking about yourself. What is real is reality, the Dhamma. Yeah. The 5 groups of grasping, the six senses, that's what's real. Yourself is artificial. So you're wasting your time thinking about yourself. Wasted time, wasted life. But don't just believe me. You've got to try it out. So when we begin to practice, we see the results for ourselves. Our life becomes more centered, more peaceful, without the confusions and complications of bringing ourselves into the picture. So hopefully if we practice this, we'll see the results for ourselves, and then you'll know the theory. The theory is correct. But until then, it's just a advice of the Buddha. But we have to put it into practice to find out for ourselves, each one for themselves. So I wish you success in your practice and in the future.
อันธรรมยังธรรมกถาสาธุการังตถามาเสสาธุ